Respectfully, Brittney Griner was in a Russian prison. You would think that somebody who is now free, back in America on home soil, would not have too much to complain about.
Imagine surviving a Russian prison. Imagine spending months locked away in a foreign country, stripped of your freedom, watching your life get placed in the hands of politicians and diplomats you've never even met. Imagine the US government negotiating your release at a cost that most Americans would call absolutely unthinkable. And then imagine coming home, back to your team, back to your career, back to the country that fought to bring you home, and your biggest complaint is that the fans are too loud. That's exactly what happened. And when Stephen A. Smith heard those words come out of Brittney Griner's mouth, he didn't laugh it off, he didn't let it slide, and he certainly didn't sugarcoat what he had to say. What followed was one of the most brutally honest moments in sports media history, a reality check so sharp and so precise that Griner completely lost her composure on a public stage. But here's the part that nobody is really talking about. This wasn't just about crowd noise. This wasn't just about one comment that went sideways. This was about something much deeper. And by the end of this video, you'll understand exactly why this situation revealed far more about Brittney Griner than she ever intended to show. Before we get into everything, tell me in the comments, do you think Griner had any right to complain after everything the US did to bring her home? Drop your honest opinion below. I want to see what this audience actually thinks, because the answer might surprise you.
Yeah, she says right there, watch this. Every time we play her, there's this commotion, like this loud rumbling from the stands. Turns out it's people, thousands of them, just sitting there watching on purpose. It's very disruptive. She says WNBA games used to be a chill, quiet place. You could bring your laptop and relax, maybe even get a little work done. But now it's like there's large gatherings of people watching us from the stands. Some of them are yelling crazy shit about what they're seeing, putting unfair pressure on us to score, like we're there for their entertainment. You are. The whole thing is toxic. I saw a guy with his daughter in the crowd, both of them yelling, couldn't hear what they were saying exactly, but it was either my performance or some light racism.
It started with what seemed like a small, almost throwaway remark. During an interview, Brittney Griner began talking about the noticeable shift in atmosphere at WNBA games, the louder crowds, the increased energy, the kind of fan engagement that the league had honestly never experienced before at that level. On the surface, you might expect a professional athlete to embrace that. More fans, more noise, more energy in the building. That's what every competitor dreams about. But Griner's take was something else entirely. She described the crowd noise as disruptive. She talked about how WNBA games used to be a calmer, quieter environment, almost relaxed, she suggested, and how that had changed dramatically. And then came the moment that stopped everyone cold. She mentioned seeing a father and his daughter in the stands, both of them cheering loudly, full of energy. And rather than reading that moment as what it clearly was, two fans enjoying a basketball game together, Griner admitted she wasn't sure if their enthusiasm was about her performance or, in her words, some light racism. Let that sink in for a second. A father and daughter at a basketball game, cheering in the stands, and Griner's immediate interpretation was that it might be racially motivated. Not passion for the sport, not excitement over a big play, racism. That was her first instinct when she looked into a crowd of people who had paid money to be there and watch her play. The phrase light racism is what really set the internet on fire, because it's such a casual, almost dismissive way of injecting a racial accusation into a situation where there was zero evidence to support it. She didn't claim someone said something. She didn't point to a specific incident. She looked at enthusiastic fans in a stadium and decided the most logical explanation for their energy might be racially driven. For many people watching, this wasn't just a strange comment, it was revealing. It showed a mindset that was actively scanning for problems in a situation that, by any reasonable measure, was entirely positive. The WNBA was gaining fans. Stadiums were filling up. People were paying attention in ways they never had before. And Griner looked at all of that and saw a threat. Stephen A. Smith saw that clip, and he had some things to say.
Respectfully, Brittney Griner was in a Russian prison. You would think that somebody who is now free, back in America on home soil, would not have too much to complain about. Especially something like this. Fans in every sport. She described the fans.
Yeah.
Here's the context that makes Griner's complaint even harder to process. Not long before she was sitting courtside complaining about enthusiastic basketball fans, Brittney Griner was inside a Russian detention facility, serving a 9-year sentence after being convicted on drug charges. She had been arrested at a Moscow airport in February 2022 after customs officials reportedly found cannabis oil cartridges in her luggage. What followed was months of legal proceedings in a foreign country, conducted largely in a language she didn't speak, inside a judicial system with a conviction rate that reportedly sits close to 99%. The odds were stacked against her in every possible way. She was far from home, cut off from her normal life, and completely dependent on diplomatic efforts she had no direct control over. Back in the United States, her situation became a national conversation. Her family pleaded publicly for her release. Athletes, celebrities, and politicians weighed in. The Biden administration was under enormous pressure to secure her freedom, and after months of back-and-forth negotiations with Russian officials, a deal was eventually reached, a prisoner exchange that would bring Griner home. She walked out of that situation in December 2022. She returned to her team the following season. She came back to a country that had fought loudly and publicly to get her home. She came back to a league that was, at that exact moment, experiencing a period of growth unlike anything it had seen in its entire history. And the thing she chose to talk about publicly? Crowd noise, the disruptive energy of fans who were excited to watch professional basketball. Stephen A. didn't let that irony pass without comment. He said it plainly on air that someone who had just survived what Griner survived, someone who had just been handed back her freedom through one of the most complex diplomatic exchanges in recent memory, should not be using that platform to complain about Americans showing up and cheering at basketball games. The contrast between where she had been and what she was now complaining about was, in his words, something he simply could not tolerate. But even Stephen A. hadn't fully gotten to the most uncomfortable part of the story yet. Because the question of who exactly was traded to bring Griner home, that's where this whole thing takes a much darker turn.
When you clearly she's not remembering who they let out to get her back.
The Merchant of Death.
The Merchant of Death. An arms dealer that wanted to kill American citizens, according to the reports. That's who they let out. For her.
To understand just how tone-deaf Griner's complaints appeared to so many people, you have to understand what was actually exchanged to secure her release. Because this wasn't a simple diplomatic handshake. This wasn't a straightforward prisoner swap between two governments. The person the United States released in exchange for Brittney Griner was Viktor Bout, a name that carries serious weight in international security circles. Viktor Bout had been serving a 25-year federal sentence in the United States. He wasn't in prison for a minor offense. He had been convicted of conspiring to kill Americans, conspiring to kill American officers, conspiring to acquire and use anti-aircraft missiles, and conspiring to provide material support to a designated terrorist organization. He was known globally by a nickname that tells you everything you need to know about the kind of man he was, the Merchant of Death. Bout had spent decades allegedly running one of the most extensive private arms trafficking networks in the world, reportedly supplying weapons to conflict zones across Africa, Asia, and the Middle East. His name had been connected to warlords, rebel groups, and some of the most violent conflicts of the late 20th and early 21st centuries. Hollywood even made a film loosely inspired by his life story. This was not a low-level figure being quietly released through some administrative process. This was the United States government making an extraordinarily difficult and deeply controversial decision to release a man convicted of conspiring to kill its own citizens, in exchange for bringing a WNBA player home. The debate over whether that trade was worth it is a conversation that went far beyond sports. National security experts, politicians, and military families all had opinions about what that exchange meant. Many Americans were openly furious about it. The optics were genuinely jarring to a significant portion of the public. And that is exactly the context that Stephen A. brought to the table when Griner's crowd noise complaints started circulating. He pointed out, plainly and without hesitation, that the person released to bring her home was someone convicted of wanting to harm American citizens. That is the price that was paid. That is the weight behind the freedom she was now using to complain about fan engagement at basketball games. The room went quiet when he said it, because there really wasn't a good counterargument available. When Stephen A. Smith addresses something on air, he doesn't ease into it gently. He's built an entire career on saying things that other people in sports media choose to step around, loudly, directly, and without much concern for whether the subject of his commentary appreciates the feedback. And when Griner's remarks landed on his radar, what came out of him was one of the more memorable moments of straight-talk sports commentary in recent memory. He didn't start with sympathy. He didn't open by acknowledging how difficult her prison experience must have been before carefully pivoting to a mild disagreement. He went straight to the point. He said respectfully that Brittney Griner had been in a Russian prison. He said that someone who is now free, back on American soil, back in her career, back with her family, that person should not have too much to complain about, especially not fans cheering at sporting events. The respectfully at the beginning of that statement almost made it sharper, because it made clear that what followed wasn't personal animosity. It was a logical assessment of an objectively absurd situation. And then he brought up Viktor Bout by name. He reminded everyone in that studio, and everyone watching at home, exactly who was released to make Griner's return possible. He called him the merchant of death. He noted the conviction, conspiring to kill American citizens. He let the weight of that sit in the air for a moment before making the contrast explicit. This is the freedom she came home to. These are the fans she's now describing as potentially racist. This is the platform she's now using to complain about crowd noise. The people in that studio reacted visibly. There was uncomfortable laughter, not because it was funny, but because the point was so sharp and so undeniable that the only available response in the moment was a kind of stunned acknowledgement. Nobody sitting in that room tried to argue back. Nobody offered a defense of Griner's position, because there wasn't one available that would hold up under basic scrutiny. What Stephen A. did in that moment wasn't cruelty. It wasn't a personal attack. It was accountability, the kind that Griner clearly hadn't encountered in a very long time. And unfortunately for her, she was nowhere near prepared for it. What happened next made everything significantly worse. If Griner had responded to Stephen A.'s commentary with even a degree of measured composure, acknowledged the point, explained her perspective calmly, or simply let the news cycle move on, the story probably would have faded within a day or two. Sports media moves fast. There's always a new controversy, a new soundbite, a new moment to dissect. A quiet, professional response from Griner would have given the story nowhere to go. She did not do that. Instead, what followed was a very public, very visible spiral that managed to draw even more attention to the original remarks and confirm virtually every criticism that had been leveled against her. She took to social media and began posting defensively, pushing back against the analysis in ways that escalated rather than de-escalated the conversation. She accused Stephen A. of not understanding her experience. She framed his entirely factual, documented commentary as ignorant. She positioned herself as a victim of unfair media scrutiny, rather than engaging with the substance of what had been raised. And in doing so, she handed Stephen A. everything he needed to make his point a second time, more clearly and with even more supporting evidence. The irony of her meltdown is almost poetic. She had complained that crowd noise was disruptive, that the increased energy and attention surrounding WNBA games was creating unwanted pressure and distraction. And then she turned around and created a multi-day media spectacle through her own defensiveness and social media activity, generating significantly more noise and distraction than any basketball crowd ever had. She became the very disruption she was complaining about. Her supporters found themselves in an increasingly difficult position. There wasn't a reasonable defense available for what she had said, and her reaction made it harder, not easier, for anyone to stand in her corner. Even people who might have been sympathetic to her experience in Russia found it difficult to justify comments that casually accused cheering sports fans of racial motivation with zero supporting evidence. The meltdown also revealed something about her media environment prior to this moment. When you're not used to facing real, substantive criticism, When accountability has been largely absent from your public life for an extended period of time, you don't have the tools to respond to it gracefully when it finally arrives. Griner didn't just mishandle the criticism. She demonstrated, in real time, that she had never really had to handle it before. None of this exists in a vacuum. To fully understand why Griner's comments landed the way they did, and why they generated such an immediate, widespread reaction, you have to understand what's been happening to the WNBA over the past year or so. Because the league is in a genuinely transformative moment, and the engine behind that transformation has a very specific name. Caitlin Clark arrived in the WNBA and immediately changed the financial and cultural landscape of the league in ways that were frankly unprecedented. Ticket prices surged. Television ratings climbed to levels the league had never seen. Arenas that were previously operating well below capacity were selling out. Merchandise flew off shelves. Casual sports fans who had never watched a WNBA game in their lives started tuning in, buying tickets and showing up with their kids, sometimes their daughters, sometimes just father-daughter pairs sitting in the stands, cheering loudly. The data backed all of this up in stark, undeniable terms. Analysts tracked ticket prices for Indiana Fever away games and found that even during periods when Clark herself was sidelined with an injury, the impact on pricing and attendance was measurable and immediate. Her absence caused prices to drop noticeably. Her presence drove them back up. The market was being brutally honest about who was generating the interest. This is the context in which Griner looked at a stadium full of energized fans and decided the most pressing issue worth discussing publicly was crowd noise. The league she plays in was experiencing a period of growth that translated directly into higher salaries, greater visibility, and expanded opportunities for every player in the league, including her. And her response to that growth was to characterize the fans driving it as potentially racist. It's worth sitting with that for a moment. The people filling those seats were providing the financial foundation for the WNBA's expanded relevance. They were the reason networks were paying attention, the reason sponsors were investing, the reason the league had any chance of sustaining itself as a mainstream product. And Griner's instinct was to view them with suspicion. Stephen A. picked up on this angle too, pointing out that the very attention Griner was complaining about was the attention that was putting more money in every WNBA player's pocket, including hers. That's not an abstract point. That's the economic reality of professional sports entertainment. There's a broader pattern underneath all of this that goes beyond Brittney Griner specifically, and Stephen A. Smith touched on it even if he didn't spell it out in those exact terms. The WNBA operated for roughly 25 years in a sports media environment where scrutiny was minimal. Criticism was largely avoided, and the expectations placed on players, both in terms of performance and public conduct, were significantly lower than those applied to athletes in other major professional leagues. That's not an insult. That's just an honest description of the reality of a league that was fighting for relevance and couldn't afford to create internal friction with the players it was trying to promote. When your attendance numbers are modest and your media coverage is limited, you manage your messaging carefully. You don't bite the hand of the players who are generating whatever buzz the league has. But the consequence of operating in that environment for an extended period of time is that some players developed a relationship with accountability that simply wasn't functional for the kind of scrutiny that comes with mainstream success. When nobody has challenged your public statements, when media coverage has been largely promotional rather than analytical, when criticism has been treated as inherently motivated by sexism or racism rather than engaged with on its merits, you develop blind spots, real ones. Griner's casual deployment of the phrase, light racism, to describe enthusiastic sports fans is a product of that environment. She wasn't anticipating pushback. She wasn't braced for anyone to examine that claim and find it empty. She made a racially charged accusation in a public forum because, historically, that kind of language had functioned as a conversation ender rather than a conversation starter in the media spaces she occupied. Stephen A. changed that calculation. He treated the accusation like what it was, an unsubstantiated claim that deserved to be examined, and when he held it up to the light, there was nothing behind it. No evidence, no specific incident, just an assumption about the worst possible motivations of people who showed up to watch professional basketball. The comparison to other professional leagues is damaging for Griner's position too. NBA players deal with hostile road crowds routinely. NFL players play in environments where tens of thousands of opposing fans are actively rooting against them. Nobody characterizes that as racism. It's just sports. And the sooner every WNBA player internalizes that reality, the better off the league will be. One of the more telling details of this entire situation is what Stephen A. Smith did after the initial blowback from his commentary started arriving. Because in today's media environment, the path of least resistance for most commentators, after making a strong statement that generates controversy, is to soften the position, walk it back slightly, add qualifiers, release a statement expressing sensitivity and nuance, make the noise stop by giving the critics something that looks like a retreat. Stephen A. did none of that. He came back stronger. He reaffirmed his position with additional context and doubled down on the prison rescue angle specifically, because he understood that it was not only accurate but irrefutable. There is no version of reality in which someone who was freed through the release of a convicted arms dealer, someone found guilty of conspiring to harm American citizens, gets to complain about basketball crowds without that context being part of the conversation. It's not mean to bring that up, it's necessary. His refusal to back down also sent a signal to the broader media conversation about WNBA accountability. For a long time, certain topics related to the league had been treated as essentially off-limits. Questions about player conduct, public statements, and professional attitudes that would have been dissected thoroughly in any other sports context were quietly set aside in coverage of women's basketball. Stephen A. didn't participate in that arrangement. He also made a point that often gets lost in these kinds of disputes, that holding someone accountable for their words is not the same as attacking them personally. He wasn't questioning Griner's basketball ability. He wasn't making comments about her character as a human being. He was responding to specific public statements she had made and placing them in factual context. That's what sports commentary is supposed to do. The fact that Griner and her supporters framed that kind of accountability as an attack says more about their relationship with criticism than it does about Stephen A.'s methodology. When factual context is treated as an assault, it reveals that the person on the receiving end has never truly had to defend their public statements before. That's a problem, not just for Griner, but for anyone who wants to be taken seriously as a public figure operating in a high-scrutiny environment. Stephen A. understood that, and his refusal to apologize for basic factual analysis is exactly why his voice carries the weight that it does. Here's the thing about this entire situation that will stick long after the social media posts fade, and the sports media cycle moves on to the next controversy. This wasn't really about crowd noise. It was never about crowd noise. It was about what happens when someone who has been insulated from accountability for a long time suddenly encounters a voice that refuses to play along with the narrative. Brittney Griner survived something genuinely harrowing. Nobody is taking that away from her. But surviving something difficult does not grant permanent immunity from examination of your own words and choices. Stephen A. Smith didn't disrespect her experience, he contextualized it. He reminded her, and everyone watching, that gratitude and perspective are not optional extras for public figures. They're part of the deal. The WNBA is at a crossroads right now. The attention it has is real, the money is real, and the opportunity is real. Whether the league's players embrace that moment or push it away with complaints and deflection, that's still being decided. What do you think? Did Stephen A. go too far? Or was this exactly the kind of accountability the moment required? Let us know in the comments. And if this video gave you something to think about, Clark's Spotlight has plenty more where that came from.